Authorization granted. Begin playback.
Radio Free Innsmouth, episode 237. You might remember way back in March, I think, I did an episode about this band from Japan called Versailles. The vocalist for this band is an interesting chap named Kamijo, who is basically real-life Castlevania.
Oh no! Night creatures! Whatever shall I do?
So he's kind of my favorite, and he's definitely a big deal in sort of like the larger Visual K musical scene, because he's been around for a long time. He started out as a roadie for Mana from Malice Miser, a band that I talked about a bit in the Moi Dis Moi episode I did right before the Versailles one. And nowadays, he's doing Versailles and his solo project. But there was a band that existed in the gap between those two eras, that of working for another big band and that of doing all of his big famous rock star stuff. And the name of this band was Lareine, which is what we are going to be covering this week.
You call this coffee?
I call this America.
So Lareine is French for the Queen, which is something I knew already because of the classic Varathron song La Reine Noire, or the Black Queen. Don't ever let anybody tell you black metal can't be educational, folks. And it makes sense that Kamijo would go with a decadent French name like that, given his association with Malice Miser, who are all about that type shit. But what the hell do Lareine actually sound like? Well, I've seen them described as Baroque pop, synth pop, art rock, progressive rock.
No shit.
But do any of those myriad labels actually do a good job of describing what Lareine sound like?
No way.
For a much more accurate starting point on where Lareine is coming from, you're better off with just reading interviews with the man himself, Kamijo, where he says his two biggest influences are ex-Japan and Paul Muriat. Now this puts two ideas in my head. One is that I really need to figure out how the stupid drum machine works in Reaper so I can get back to recording demos for the express purpose of giving interviews to the music press, where I will claim that my two main influences are Deicide and Twice.
I've soared with the eagles and I've slithered with the snakes and I've been everywhere in between, and I'm gonna tell you something right now.
I'm also wondering what the heck a Paul Muriat is and what it sounds like when you mix it with X-Japan. Because I know X-Japan, alright? I did an episode on them almost 2 years ago. I've been listening to them since high school. Everybody knows X-Japan. They made a big documentary about them that a lot of people watched. They're the band what goes like... with the fast drums and the guitar solos and the power metal and all that. What I don't know, or at least what I didn't know before I started doing research for this episode, is what a Paul Muriat was. Paul Muriat was a French guy.
You said this was French roast.
Ah oui, regardez. C'est marqué French roast.
More cream.
A big band leader who wrote a whole lot of this orchestral soundtracky sounding stuff during the 60s. You know, it's not really something I probably would have come across on my own if a musician that I enjoyed the work of hadn't mentioned it.
But
I don't know, I kind of like it. So what happens when you get some weird goth rock guy trying to combine that with late 80s power thrash metal? Well, you get what Lareine sounds like. I can't get over how different Kamijo's vocals sound on this compared to his modern day very deep bassy crooning. He sounds so young here.
yeah, those were the memories.
But that airier tone actually fits the more ethereal nature of this music well. I mean, it still features a fairly dominant guitar presence with a whole lot of these like twin leads, but they tend to be a bit more Fields of the Nephilim and a little bit less Iron Maiden-ish.
But
Tangentially related to Iron Maiden, and like many Visual K bands, these guys have very strong bass guitar presence. This makes sense because as far as I can tell from a lot of hastily translated old Visual K fanzine interviews, it looks like during most of this band's history, it was a pretty equal three-way songwriting split between Kamijo the vocalist, Emiru the bassist, and Mayu the guitarist. As you can no doubt tell, these songs have a whole lot of different sections to them. There's a lot of build-ups, come-downs, full stops, turnarounds. I guess that's where the progressive rock angle that some people attribute to this band comes from. As for me, I don't really see this as being too akin to progressive rock, because it's not super technically complex music. It's structurally complex, but it's not super hard to play. When it does get a little bit more technically complex is when they get down to some straight up like ex-Japan worship, to where the only way you would know that this isn't just an ex-Japan style band is when Kamija's vocals kick in.
It's stylistically designed to be that way, and you can't undo that, but we can diminish the effects of it.
I mean, that just sounds like ex-Japan. It's got the punkish drum beat, it's got the soaring guitar solos, it's got the rhythm guitar playing those strings of power chords. Hell, even that weird tuned percussion intro is totally something out of the ex-Japan playbook. But then Kamija's vocals come in, and they are not the sort of thing you would hear from ex-Japan's Toshi at all. They're way more subdued. And as you're hearing in this section, the guitars deviate from the ex-Japan formula. They're not as emphatic on the thrashing, and during the quiet parts, they're less about Queen-style pageantry and more into this sort of post-punk bounciness, which is ironic given that the band is named Lareine, the Queen.
My God.
You might have extrapolated from the two songs I've played so far that this band has a wide variety of sounds that they showcase over the course of an album, and that is very true, but there's another reason that their albums sound all over the place, and that's because even for a visual K band, these guys were very heavy on singles and EPs. A lot of their quote-unquote full-length albums are really just collections of tracks from various EPs and singles. So at times, their full-length releases might kind of seem all over the place and disjointed, or depending on your point of view, very interesting, winding, varied journeys. That first song I played on here was from their first full-length album, which is one of their true full-length LPs, not a compilation of songs from other releases. But that second one, that was from an EP that actually even had two different versions. It had the regular version, which was called Etude, and then the slightly more sought-after Christmas version, which literally had them playing all of the same songs, but they were sourced from completely different recordings. What I'm saying is, if you're into collecting stuff, this band has a whole lot of garbage for you to buy.
They're never gonna stop!
Endless trash!
Their second full-length album, Ghost of Romance, has 16 songs on it, and you can know just by eyeballing it, this one's a fix-up of a whole bunch of earlier singles they did. And that means the variation between tracks is going to be off the charts. Luckily for us, it also means that one of their best, more metal-tinged songs, Wind's Temptation, gets to lead it off. This one sees them dropping the ex-Japan worship that kind of dogged their earlier heavy songs. Favor something that's a lot more original. If you really pay attention to the guitar parts here, a lot of these riffs are basically post-punk riffs that are sort of bootstrapped into being speed metal riffs. It's very interesting. There's also a real sense of rhythmic fluidity to it, with that really bendy, segmented melodic guitar lead. You can definitely see the roots of what Kamija would later do with his post-Versailles solo project back in the Lareine days. This section right here is pretty cool because the rhythm guitars are sort of doing this like pop-punk choppy strum thing, but then the lead guitar is doing this jangly like indie rock thing over it, and yet with the drumming it's all sort of happening in the middle of this speed metal song. There's a whole lot of weird different stuff going on, but the song's well written enough that it doesn't feel strange. Case in point, the super post-punk bridge with the heavy bass emphasis leading right back into the speed metal. Like, normally you wouldn't hear these two completely different types of music put that close to each other. I mean, I don't know how many post-punk power metal hybrids I've heard, but these guys managed to pull off the mixture. In addition to having one of their best heavy metal style songs, this EP also features one of their best songs from the other side of that spectrum.
Autism.
A delightful little Spanish-inflected number called Deceived by the Sea, kind of showing off their softer side in this intro with a very spare acoustic guitar. But when it kicks in, it reminds me of something, and I want to see if it reminds you guys of the same thing. Right? Isn't that pretty close to the Dragon Roost Island theme from Wind Waker?
Well, excuse me.
princess.
Like, I'm pretty sure that's even the same MIDI flute patch. This chorus here is really cool because even in this lighter moment, there's still an alternating between different styles. What with inserting that French-inspired accordion sting and then immediately flipping back into the more flamenco-style stuff. But if you want to talk about a wide variance in sound, this song that we're listening to right now comes right after the one we just played, that really heavy metal one. And now we get into the kind of troubled history of Lareine. So part of the reason that a lot of their songs on the album sound very different from each other is that a lot of them are culled from all these different singles. But another reason is that outside of the core of Kamijo, Emeru, and Mayu, they really had trouble keeping members. They got a whole bunch of different guitarists and drummers involved. And this actually led to the band sort of breaking up, but not really. Basically, they held their last concert, kind of, in August of 2000, but then Kamijo immediately started a solo project. And then Mayu, the guitarist from Lareine, ended up joining it.
너는 산이야 바다야?
What do you mean, why do I keep switching between trying to say it with a French accent and then just going all Lareine?
Shooting Tex.
I don't know, I'm fucking quirky. I'm not like the other girls.
Nigga get on my nerves too, man. What's part of the nigga charm, man?
But anyways, Lareine kind of broke up, but not really. And Kamijo called this new project that had most of Lareine involved with it, New Sodomy?
I might also just begin. Who
the hell knows in these increasingly strange days?
Which is probably one of the weirdest names for a band. The only thing where I could find Kamijo talking about what the hell a new Sodomy was on this WordPress interview thing that I'm pretty sure wasn't translated very well. But nearest I can tell, it was him doing some kind of weird Cockney rhyming slang / word splicing thing, but with like English, French, and Japanese, and then it's also kind of playing into that whole like Baudelaire decadent libertine thing. It's sure a wacky name for a band, and despite the sold New Sodomy album essentially being a Lareine album in all but name, it's definitely one of their weirder ones, specifically on the heavier tracks. The lighter tracks sound pretty much just like Lareine, but the more metallic ones kind of move away from the weird blend of power metal and post-punk into this gothic semi-industrial territory that reminds me more of like mid-90s Nightfall than anything else. And not only because of the ridiculous overuse of orchestra hits. I don't know, that weird stutter strum with the palm muted guitar and the orchestra hits really do make me think of the third and fourth albums from Nightfall. And I mean, Kamijo did do a little bit of death metal experimentation with his solo project way later, so it's not really that out of the ordinary to assume that it might have been an influence, or possibly just a strange aesthetic convergence. Either way, the synthesizer work on this album is a whole lot more menacing sounding and abrupt and very tense. As far as Lareine albums go, it's definitely the darkest they ever were, and it's sort of an interesting stylistic digression that he would then later pick up on with his Symphony of the Vampire solo EP. I like that weird auto-tune vocoder shit too. If you ask me, that's how that sort of technology should be used. Not to fix errors in singing, but just to make weird noises. I don't know, I'm a death metal person. I like making weird noises with shit. That's New Sodomy. And you might remember I said earlier, Lareine sort of broke up, but not really, because yeah, Kamijo realized I literally have like most of Lareine right here. I might as well call the band Lareine, and he came back for a couple more albums. One of which, Never Cage, was actually like a full-length album of pretty much all new songs written specifically for the album, and it definitely showed off the wide variance in Lareine's sound. Like, you got these really peppy numbers where there's sort of a pop-punk thing going on with overlaid power metal lead guitar in a very major key, and it honestly doesn't sound that far off from some of the late career experimentation from Aphasia, especially when the guitar gets really sparkly in tone like you're hearing now. The synthesizers have dropped all of the menace from the New Sodomy era in favor of the more classic Lareine ethereal atmospherics. The bass is bouncier than it's ever been. And overall, despite being the most guitar-oriented album to date from them, it seems like it's also the happiness until you get to...
Man, shut the fuck up, you tropical snake!
The heavier songs, which are sort of this weird hybrid of Visual K kind of jangly guitar and thrash metal riff stacking, honestly doesn't sound that far off from a lot of gargoyle material. I love the darker tone of the lead guitar melodies. That's another concept that he would explore a whole bunch on the third Kamijo solo album. This clean guitar part right here actually reminds me a lot of some Norwegian black metal stuff even. This section here is so cool with that one flanged out lead guitar kind of interlocking with this weird, complex chugging riff. Right? That's pretty neat.
How neat is that?
And that's honestly probably the best way to sum up Lareine's music. It's just a whole lot of neat stuff. You know, it's kind of hard to nail down, but it's great. And with that, we've pretty much come to the end of our Lareine episode. After this, Kamijo would go on to do the whole Versailles thing. Lareine and Versailles, I believe, actually coexisted for like a year and a half or something. But Lareine, honestly, might be my favorite thing that Kamijo has ever been involved with. Maybe just below the third Kamijo solo album, Song, which I should probably just do a whole episode on because there's so much I have to say about that. But hopefully you learned something though. Thanks for listening. Thanks for watching if you watched it, and I'll see you next time.
I like to lie. I like to break stuff. I like to throw things. I like to go around telling people my brain is not a supercomputer. Well, hey, guess fucking what? It doesn't matter.